voice of God.
Welcome to the 11th Annual President's Commencement Colloquy. At this time, we ask that you silence your cell phone. Connection to public Wi-Fi will be available for tweeting questions. Now, please welcome Provost Dr. Prabhat Hajela.
Good afternoon. I'm Prabhat Hajela, Provost at Rensselaer, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 11th President's Commencement Colloquy. The Commencement Colloquy was established by President Jackson in 2003 to provide a forum for the Rensselaer community to gather on the eve of commencement for a dialogue with our honorands. Please join me in welcoming the host and moderator for today's colloquy, the 18th President of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, the Honorable Dr. Shirley Ann Jackson.
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. It is with great pride that I welcome our 2013 graduates, their families, and all members of the Rensselaer community here with us, and all of those watching online. And I know he's somewhere in the hall or will be here, and so I would like to give a special welcome to our good friend, Congressman Paul Tonko. For more than a decade, working together, we've engaged in a transformation here at Rensselaer that has been guided by what we call the Rensselaer Plan. That effort has brought us new people, new programs, new platforms, and new partnerships. Platforms including this magnificent Curtis R. Priem Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center, in which we now sit, you sit. We now are moving to a new era, guided by a refreshed strategic plan. We call it the Rensselaer Plan 2024, that will position us for our 200th anniversary 11 years hence. And with that plan, we are shifting from a focus on transforming Rensselaer to becoming increasingly transformational. We seek to be transformational in our students' lives, transformational in our innovative approach to education, and transformational in the global impact of our research. We are intently focused on addressing the global challenges that we face in the 21st century, and we fully expect that our 2013 graduates will go on to change lives, to advance society, and indeed, to change the world, as Rensselaer graduates always have. That is why, as we begin this journey to our bicentennial, guided by our refreshed blueprint for progress, it is so appropriate that we are joined today by four truly transformational leaders. All have demonstrated courage, creativity, and commitment, as they each have created historic change. As our conversation progresses, you will learn a lot more about them, but let me begin by welcoming our special guests. In 1996, Time magazine listed our first honorand among the 25 most influential people in America for her extraordinary achievements working in the technology sector, including in the upper echelons at Microsoft as head of its consumer division and its interactive media division. The Time Top 25 are those who have, and I quote, the ability to show us the world anew, to educate and entertain us, to change the way we think about ourselves and others. That is the quote. Now, this honorand had achieved that level of acclaim before she spearheaded a national effort for Bill Gates to bring computers into public libraries and classrooms, before she created and led the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, before she guided the Smithsonian Institution through a turbulent time, before she served on the U.S. delegation to the UN General Assembly Special Session on AIDS, a special focus of the Gates Foundation, and before she chaired President Obama's White House Council on Community Solutions. A global leader in the technology, foundation, and nonprofit sectors, she is a member of the Women in Technology International Hall of Fame and a founding member of the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. Currently, she is the director of the Washington, D.C.-based Martha's Table. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Patty Stonecipher. Our next honorand arrived at Xerox in 1980 as a mechanical engineering summer intern. Then she did what few people in industry do these days. She did not leave. She worked her way up through the ranks. Within 10 years, she was an assistant to the CEO, then advanced to vice president for worldwide manufacturing. By 2000, she was working with then CEO Anne Mulcahy to stabilize the company. As president and CEO of Xerox since 2009, she is celebrated for the transformation of a global company so familiar to us that its name is a verb. When the President of the United States is seeking wise counsel on economic issues, she is among the elite group of global business leaders invited to the White House. And in 2010, President Obama appointed her as vice chair of the U.S. Export Council. A tireless advocate for STEM education, that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, she is a founding board member of Change the Equation, a CEO-led initiative mobilizing the business community to improve the quality of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics learning in the United States. So please join me in welcoming one of the most forceful and effective global business leaders, Ms. Ursula Burns. Our next honorand has been at the forefront of some of the most critical events and public policy issues of our time. Do you recall the iconic White House Situation Room photo from the night of the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound? There he is, standing just behind President Obama, at the center of gravity as history is unfolding, a spot not unfamiliar to him. As chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from 2007 to 2011, he was the top military advisor to both President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. He oversaw the end of the combat mission in Iraq, and he guided the development and implementation of a new military strategy for Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, interestingly, he was drawn into the military by a basketball scholarship to the U.S. Naval Academy. But once there, he was hooked on the Navy and served for more than 40 years. Though he graduated, so he says, in 1968, and he told Dave Letterman this, in the bottom third of his class, and famously had a rocky start. Perhaps more on that later. He advanced to successfully command ships and fleets and joint and multinational forces in the Navy. He went on to become the 28th Chief of Naval Operations and then one of the most influential chairmen of the Joint Chiefs in modern military history. He has received countless awards and citations, including the prestigious Vice Admiral James B. Stockdale Award, particularly noteworthy because the honorees for that award are nominated by their peers. Now, he also is the proud recipient of a coveted trophy for his yo-yo skills. So please join me in welcoming an extraordinary public servant, one who in retirement, along with his wife Deborah, continues to dedicate his time and talents to the care and concerns of the members of the U.S. military and their families, the Honorable Admiral Mike Mullen. Our fourth honorand is a distinguished member of the United States House of Representatives and a giant of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, a true profile in courage. He was drawn into the fray as a teenager growing up in the South, listening to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the radio. In the 1960s, at about the same age as many of our graduates, he led the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, organizing young people to stand up for what was right by sitting down at segregated lunch counters, organizing freedom rides on segregated bus routes, and coordinating efforts to register people to vote. In doing so, at tremendous personal risk and with a persistent commitment to nonviolence, he helped to galvanize support to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Then, in 1965, televised images of him and fellow marchers left beaten and bloodied en route from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, seeking only the right to vote, finally shocked the country and ultimately the Congress, leading to passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Long considered the conscience of the U.S. Congress, for more than half a century, he has remained steadfast in his pursuit of equality, justice, and fairness for all. For his extraordinary contributions, President Obama awarded him the nation's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He also was the first recipient of the John F. Kennedy Library's Profile in Courage Lifetime Achievement Award and numerous other prestigious honors. First elected in 1986 to represent the Atlanta, Georgia area in the U.S. Congress, he now is a senior member of the House Ways and Means Committee and the House Democratic leadership. He is a steadfast, powerful voice for the disenfranchised, particularly on health care and voting rights. Now, he was born and raised just outside of Troy. That's Troy, Alabama. But we feel we are welcoming him home today. And so we are honored to have this true American hero here with us. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable John Lewis. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Now, in his 1963 letter from the Birmingham jail 50 years ago, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. famously wrote of the distinction between being a thermometer that simply records the temperature of popular opinion as compared to being a thermostat that actually transforms and regulates the temperature of the society. And today we're honored then to be joined by 4 high-powered thermostats, people who by their actions, words, and example have transformed and regulated the temperature of society globally. By exploring their experiences and their aspirations, we can better understand the path forward. So let us begin the discussion with a focus on leading cultural shifts. Congressman Lewis, now you obviously were a major force in the 1960s civil rights movement, which led to the passage of that transformative legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and then the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, these brought down barriers for African Americans, people like us, who had been restricted from staying at certain hotels, eating at certain restaurants, and riding certain buses, and voting in certain states. And so we're nearing the 50th anniversary of many landmark civil rights events that created a significant cultural shift in this country. However, as you know, these issues are not entirely settled. And as you really know, the Supreme Court is expected to rule soon on a major challenge to the heart of the Voting Rights Act. And during oral arguments in February, Justice Antonin Scalia, who was our guest here last year, labeled the Voting Rights Act, and I quote, a perpetuation of racial entitlement. Now, what impact do you think those statements have on an effort to build what you describe as a beloved country? In fact, what do you expect from the upcoming Supreme Court decision, and have we forgotten some history we need to remember? We're interested.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you, Dr. Jackson.
Well, please call me Shirley.
Thank you for having each one of us here. I'm delighted to be here. I think during the past 50 years or more, we have witnessed what I like to call a nonviolent revolution in America. A revolution of values, a revolution of ideas, but that revolution is not complete. We have seen unbelievable changes. You know, 50 years ago, in the American South, there was signs that said white, waiting, colored waiting, white men, white women, colored women. Those signs are gone, and they will not return. The only places you will see those signs today will be in a book, in a museum, or on a video. They are gone, and they will not return. I was sitting in the Supreme Court when Justice Scalia made that statement. It was shocking to me, unbelievable. I couldn't believe that any person alive today in America would have that attitude or that feeling, and especially someone sitting on the United States Supreme Court. The right to participate in the democratic process, to cast a vote, is powerful. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool that we have in a democratic society, and it must not be denied, must not be taken away. Being able to register or to be able to cast a vote should be as easy as getting a glass of water. I think, now, I don't want to predict anything. I will get in trouble. And I don't want to get in that type of trouble. But within the next few days, maybe less than 10 days, the Supreme Court will rule. It's my hope and my prayer that it will do what is right, fair, and just, and uphold Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. If not, it will be a major setback, and we will have to organize over and over again.
And so you think some of these states still need the oversight that Section 5 requires?
Oh, I think these states, they need it. If not, they will slip back. They will be tempted to go back. There are places in the American South today that are resegregating the politics of the South, the politics of America.
Let's come back to that. Admiral Mullen, You know, in light of what he said, you know, it's interesting what you've done, because on your watch, both as chairman of the Joint Chiefs and previously as chief of naval operations, you actually oversaw a shift in many ways of the military and its responsibilities from a focus on battleground readiness to one that also requires our soldiers to be diplomats, communicators, civic leaders, educators, and so much more. And because of new technologies, and let's just say it, including drones, but because of increased terrorism, because of pernicious roadside IEDs, improvised explosive devices, you know, I think more people feel it's often not clear where the real battlefront is anymore. And so you know more than most people here about what it means for the U.S. to have been in a state of war now for more than a decade. And as a result, we in the end are asking a great deal more of our military and their families. The deployments are longer and they're more frequent. I, for one, know a young man who's been deployed 3 times and maybe a 4th. But I am coming to a question. But before I get to that question, I do want to take a moment to ask that anyone who's in this audience who is either in the military, is a veteran, or a family member of a military member, please stand to be recognized. We don't care if it's 1 or 200. So we want to thank you for your service. Now to the question. Admiral, what effects have the changes in expectations, the changes in technology, and changes in the battlefront had on the culture of the military and on our country and on the lives of the people we just recognized?
Well, Madam President, it's great to be here with such a distinguished group and at such an exciting time as it is. We have many challenges that we face, but one of the things that we can always depend on is this time every year there's great joy all over the country for the graduations and the futures that give many of us so much confidence about that future. I also, before I answer your question directly, would just like to express my personal gratitude to Congressman Lewis, because back in those days, and I was this young white kid growing up in a nice little lower middle class neighborhood in Southern California in Los Angeles, and I just finished my first year at the Naval Academy. And as was mentioned, I was a basketball player, and I was home in the summer of '65 watching Watts burn, which was 15 miles from my house, and it could have been the moon to me. I had no idea, no relationship to it, other than I would go down there to watch sporting events when I was a kid to the toughest part of Los Angeles. And it was really in that time that your leadership and so many others really started to turn the tables with respect to who we were as a country in terms of equality and representation. And while we're not through, and I think no one knows that better than you, without that, we would be a much different country today. And so I personally was affected by that. And actually that had great influence on my leadership approach the whole time I was in the Navy with respect to trying to create as much opportunity for as many people as possible. And I know, President Jackson, you focused a great deal on change. I mean, we're just living at such an extraordinary time of change in our culture. We're 11 and a half years into these wars. We've never been at war this long. If I was a 5-year-old kid in one of these families when they started, and one of these families were my father or my mother, and mothers much more so now in this military than we have historically. 15% of our force is female. and had deployed 3 or 4 or 5 times. And I'm now 15 or 16. My whole conscious life has been at war. That's never happened in our country, and they've been extraordinary. Half our force is married. We are more dependent than ever on strong support at home when we're deployed, and the spouses and the children have both been greatly affected, but they've been extraordinarily supportive of what has happened. And contrary to what happened back in the 60s and the 70s in Vietnam, where the American people blamed those of us in uniform for the war, that has not been the case. The American people have been extraordinarily supportive and remain supportive of our men and women in uniform. And just to remind everybody, we have 60,000 in Afghanistan as we speak. And yes, we're coming out of Afghanistan, it's 18 months away, and there's too high a probability that a handful of those individuals won't see the sun come up tomorrow. And so their sacrifice and their service has been extraordinary. In the 43 years I served, easily the best military that I've had the privilege to be in. And we have changed dramatically. And our culture, after 11 and a half years of war, we're a wartime force. We're a force that's much more dependent on, culturally, on the other services. And we have very strong service ethos and cultures, but we have brought them together at a time where we needed to, because when people are dying, barriers really do come down, and change that you would like to have made but just couldn't quite get it over the goal line, it happens and it must happen at a pace to equal that of the enemy who we were up against when these wars started. So it's an extraordinary group. I worry a great deal. It's less than 1% of America. As many veterans and members of the military just stood up in here, families throughout the country are fewer and fewer that know us. And I worry over time, as these wars recede, and America has not had to buy into these wars. America has not had to overtly sacrifice significantly, other than those who actually have been in the military, by and large. And I worry in 18 months, America just accelerates moving on from these wars and leaves these extraordinary young men and women behind. So I spend a fair amount of my time now trying to focus on that issue for veterans and families with my wife, Deborah. But it's also been a great privilege to be with them. And actually, as I look back to the 60s, when my career started, it's been much more change than I realized I would have to be involved in.
Now, speaking of change, Ms. Burns, Ursula, you've certainly led a cultural shift at your company, at Xerox, transforming it into the world's leading enterprise for business process and document management. But no doubt there have been some risky steps along the way, and clearly some hard decisions, which obviously required you to rely on your vast experience, but also on your most deeply held beliefs. So what do you think have been some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned in making being able to make or drive such a shift? And what were some of the most difficult challenges that can help people to understand what it takes to shift an organization?
I, as well, add my thank you and honor of being here.
Thank you.
Congressman Lewis and Admiral, you are pillars. I was in the Situation Room, by the way. It's really small. It's pretty cool. A cool place.
Were you there that night?
No, I wasn't. I was there when no one else was there. Nothing was happening. It's an amazing time that we live in. So at Xerox, one of the things that we went through 2 fundamental changes in our company under my leadership, in my time. We went through, obviously, many, many more. And the first was a leadership change between myself and Ann Mulcahy. And the reason why this was important was because we had 2 very unique and very different personalities. We were partners, Ann and I, for just about our whole career, and definitely in the last 8 years of our careers together. But we had such an amazingly different background, amazingly different approach to business. And by the way, it made it work well when we were together. But when one of us left, what I found was we had to reestablish or establish a center, because we didn't have a center before. We had two different people, and there was a way to kind of play it off in a very positive way between the two of us. So the first transformation was to try to break down this normal approach that we had of niceness. We were, we are an amazingly gentlemanly and gentlewomanly company. So we, any dissension was handled in a very nice way. You would sit through most things, even if you didn't agree with it, and you would, shake your head and shake the hand.
Come to a university.
Yeah, it's all kind. Yeah. So one of the biggest transformations was to actually, to what I call kill this terminal niceness and bring in some dissension. There was an interview done by me, of me, by the New York Times, and it wasn't the point of the interview, but the title was, "We're a family so we can disagree." And it was a great way to capture not the main point of the article, but as a leadership team in a company or a leadership team in anywhere, one of the things you have to count on is that you have space to be wrong, you have space to debate, you have space to relax. And if you have too much form in a company and too much niceness, then it becomes impossible to get the best out of people. So what I had to do was open up. One of the first things I did was open up this, let's debate it. Let's not really be too nice to each other. If it was a really bad discussion, decision, presentation, whatever, let's say it when it's happening, not a week later when we say, well, I never really agreed with that in the first place, right? So that was one big thing. And the second thing was that we were unbelievably process-driven. Most people would love this as an attribute, and we had perfected it to the point where every single thing that we did took a very long time and was with minimal risk. And while it's good if you're building a nuclear power plant, it's really not good if all you're trying to do is decide which pricing plan to put out to a customer. Failing fast is probably a good thing to do here. So these are two things that we had to kind of break down as we changed the company and as we changed leadership. Not that Ann's approach was wrong. It was no longer appropriate for the time that we were in. And so the time that we were in was driven by the bigger change, which was the acquisition of a company that changed our foundation and our center. It actually pulled on all the skills that we had. So, it wasn't like we were going to be a car maker if we were a diaper maker. It wasn't anything like that. We were just trying to use skills in a broader way. And we bought a company that was almost our size, a little bit smaller, more employees. They had 80,000 employees. We had 50,000 employees. Completely different geographic mix. In the United States, by the way, but we are a Northeast company, and we have some places in California, and they were in Utah. And so it seemed as though it should be easy because we're all in America, and we all speak the same language. You would think so. Not quite, right? Culture is very, very different. Pace is different. Norms are different. So it was almost as difficult to integrate these two companies than as it would have been to integrate a company that we purchased in Africa. So what we had to do is actually take it very slowly and make some decisions to not integrate. So we have some core values at our company. We're a team-based company. We are committed to diversity. We actually thrive on it. We actually focus on our customers. We use innovation to solve very complex problems. We count on our employees to be the most important portions of value creation. Those things go on every single place that we do business, on every single one. Just about everything else, go for it. Go for it and actually give me some insight about a better or different way to do it. That's the good news, right? So everybody's kind of energized and moving and everything is changing, and that's the bad news, right? So I said, you don't have to be nice, as nice as you were before. We don't have to have all this process stuff that was slowing us down, and everything is open except for these small set of things. Now imagine having 125,000 people operating with this level of freedom. So when you open up, you have to be ready and clear about making decisions on the fly about what's acceptable and what you have to pull back. So that was the challenge was moving And then the challenge was containing the movement. And by the way, I think we're doing okay now. So we're not out of control, which is a good thing, but it is a daily challenge to try to keep us all contained, all organized.
Well, you know, it's interesting because both you and the Admiral are basically, in different ways, are talking about countries within the country. You know, how there can be a lot of very different kind of cultural nuance. Now, I think the Admiral might agree with me that process is important if one wants to build a nuclear power plant, I would say, having regulated a few. On the other hand, maybe you do want to fail fast before you put them on the ships. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Patty Stonecipher, the information technology revolution, particularly in the last 20 years, has in fact caused and created enormous cultural shifts. And we see it here at the university, you know, fundamentally changing how people live, work, play, and communicate. And as a technology leader at Microsoft, you were very much part of driving that revolution. And then you went on to create and manage the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which through its approach, which I found interesting because I sort of believe in this too, of concentrating enormous resources on very targeted problems. Malaria, AIDS, vaccinations, for example, but at a global scale. You created a fundamental shift in the world of philanthropy. So what I really want to ask you is, how did the technology shifts that you were part of in the 1980s and early 1990s actually help to enable the philanthropic gains you were able to achieve in your work at the Gates Foundation? Now, philanthropy, I'm happy to say, supports scientific discovery and technological innovation. But how have new technologies changed the practice of philanthropy?
Well, let me start by saying thank you to Dr. Jackson for bringing all of us together and all of this group together. Your leadership is why we're all here.
Well, thank you.
But the changes in philanthropy over the last 20 years have been profound, but I think in some ways they've started with the 60s and that sense of shared responsibility for this country and for and really for the planet, and with the sense of what happened in Vietnam and the awareness. And I would say the first thing that that technology changed about philanthropy was our ability as concerned citizens to be aware and to become knowledgeable at a much different level about issues that weren't outside our door. Philanthropy historically, you start with your family and your community and maybe those great institutions that served you well, and I'm not in a place to speak against that. It's served all of us. But this ability in the last 20 years to know, accept, and learn, and to find like-minded communities. So I'd say first was the awareness of the social issues and what changes can happen. The second was entirely new kinds of collaboration, high stakes, high data, high shared goals collaborations that you could have the scientist at RPI, the TB expert at Stanford, the folks in Geneva, and the group in Mozambique working together, sharing demographic information, scientific information, social behavior information to create change at a pace and with a level of insight and wisdom that was unprecedented. And so it became this cycle where the awareness was there, the high stakes collaboration were there. And then what we saw in the mid-80s with Merck using technology they had developed for parasites in dogs to suddenly realize that technology could be used to cure river blindness, made people, there was a shift that the platforms of which we were building health technologies, information technologies, biotechnology, that if we could stand on the research and expense of those platforms that was based on market behaviors and the rich world needs and figure out how to use those platforms to reach that additional need, to reach that additional level of global citizens, of global needs. The corporations responded, The NGO world responded, the global players responded, and we see more happening based on those technology platforms than we could have ever hoped. I'll just give one example. TB, whether it's the folks in the genomic area or the people in the treatment area or the folks in pharmaceutical, the amount of energy going on in that space was unthinkable 20 years ago. We were just doing the same thing we'd been doing forever, treating TB in this difficult, hard to implement way. And the possibilities for what could happen with that disease over the next 10 years are dramatically different because of information technology, biotechnology, and the kind of collaborations. And then last, I would say, is this whole idea of holding each other more accountable. I think performance management has changed dramatically because of the technology, and I think philanthropy has changed a lot because of performance management. So I am thrilled to have been part of this giving pledge with more than 100 American billionaires committing the majority of their wealth to philanthropy. Now, they happen to be a generation that built their wealth in the 60s and 70s or 80s or came of age during that period, so they had a sense that that wealth was not theirs. It belonged to society. It certainly was a reflection of their hard work, but a lot of luck and a wonderful country, and that there was a responsibility to give it back. But I have spoken to so many who start by saying, but I'm just not sure any of it will work. And the good news is that the performance management that we're able to do now and share and hold ourselves accountable for philanthropy, for government, for corporations with the level of transparency and information sharing is making people more confident that investments in big ideas, blending philanthropic dollars with government dollars, is possible and doable. And all of that is based on this platform of information and health technology.
Do you think that philanthropy is changing, though, because of how and the times in which our newest billionaires have grown up?
I do.
Where could you want to speak to that?
I do. I think this idea of shared responsibility, I tell the story, I think you probably heard me tell it, Shirley, that when I was at Microsoft and we're having a corporate retreat, one of the conversations we had was, we didn't know we'd make a lot of money. It was actually all about this idea that these computers could return the power that had been held by the few to the many. The computer on every desk in every home was a social rallying cry, as much as it was, this is cool technology, we can make things happen. It was both of those things, right? It was an empowerment message. So many of the folks who built unexpected wealth during that period had come of age during the time of civil rights awareness, during a time of awareness of challenges to this country and global challenges, and they never thought that money was really there. So that conversation all those years ago was about how much money is enough, and the general assessment was $3 million was more than enough. Because I remember Bill saying, how many pairs of socks can you buy? And it turns out you can buy a lot of socks, even with $3 million. And so the idea was then, what do you do with the rest of it? And the discussion was amongst a very wide-ranging group of people from very different backgrounds. The discussion was, how do you return it to society in a way that has great impact and that's fun, by the way? And so I see in this generation of philanthropists, people who are joyful, but have very high expectations for where that money goes and feel responsible for people far beyond those first two rings of our family and our community that many prior generations had, because we now realize how tightly entwined we are with this wider ring of global citizens and global players.
Please.
Dr. Jackson, I just want to thank Patty for being out there, doing what I call just getting in the way, and leading people to new heights. Because we live in a world community, and it's not just America, it's the world. And people have shared values and have a shared vision of what we want America to become and what we want the world to become. And I see it every day with the nonprofit sector, foundation executives coming together, working together on a common problem for the common good. That's good.
It is good. Thank you.
Ursula?
Two points I want to build on and actually counter a little bit, because one of the things I find is that because we have these billionaires, and the billionaires give, which is absolutely perfect, appropriate, et cetera, that people who are not billionaires actually believe that they shouldn't give because theirs will have less of an impact. And I like your analogy of how many pairs of socks do you need? I say this whenever I speak at universities, any place I have a chance to speak. There's a certain amount of money that's enough. It's generally a lot lower than you think. It's a lot lower than you think. So you don't have to be a billionaire to actually realize that you have enough, and the rest of it can be used in other ways for other people. And so while I absolutely admire and KISS, I want to make sure that we don't actually set the bar so high that people who actually only have $100,000 can figure out that probably $95,000 is probably enough, and that $5,000 can help. That's one. The second thing is, I just watched this recently with the Oklahoma disaster. Your point, which I agree with as well, of you can see things today, you can become close to things today that you have no other way to get close to. I mean, how many people have been to Oklahoma? Not a whole lot. But you literally watch what happened in Oklahoma, and I'm sorry, I didn't. I mean, it's not Manhattan, right? I mean, but I know that there are a lot of people in Oklahoma, but.
She did it. There are a lot of people who've been to Oklahoma.
Yeah, I've been to Oklahoma, actually. They have a big plant in Oklahoma. But what I mean is that literally people who haven't been, even outside the United States, you actually feel invested personally in what's happening in this kind of remote space because of technology. And that's positive. It's very, very positive. And we have to actually continue to use that for the good instead of always often for the negative. We have to make sure that we continue to use it for the good. And that's one of the things that Microsoft and a lot of the tech companies have allowed us to do.
Totally agree. And let me just clarify, the vast majority of philanthropy comes from individuals.
Right.
By far the most. And I think technology has been every bit as empowering. I care a lot about reproductive rights. And I lived for the last couple of decades in Seattle, where there's no problem. The laws there, the protections there are very good. I now, as an individual, and my daughter and my neighbor, have access to information about what state, what situation, what group is moving in which place. Absolutely. And the ability to be targeted with that $5,000 I do have to spend, with that $500 that you care about feeding the hungry in Washington, D.C., and to know whether Martha's Table or So Others Might Eat is a better investment based on what they can do. The ability, that same unleashing, that shortening of distance between my values and someone who needs help with that same issue, and the ability to find the effort is empowered at the individual level too.
I also think that, I'm not supposed to answer the questions, but that what technology can do is provide a magnifying effect, because it allows you to link up with those who have a similar focus. And so your 5,000 can become 10,000 or 100,000. And we shouldn't forget that. Let's talk for a few minutes about courage, okay? And I love quoting Congressman Lewis. So, you know, you accepted the John F. Kennedy Profile in Courage Lifetime Achievement Award in 2001, and I'm just going to quote from the last 2 sentences in something you said. You said, "Courage is not rooted in reason, but rather courage comes from a divine purpose to make things right." And you wanted to make things right for your siblings, because at the age of 15, you said you were inspired again by hearing the Reverend Dr. King on the radio. You were living outside of Troy, Alabama at the time. And your first act of civil disobedience was to gather your brothers and sisters and to take them to the Troy Public Library to get a library card. And you were turned away with the admonition, of course, that library cards were only for white children. Now, when I heard this story, I was struck by the fact that your first step into the movement was focused on expanding access to education. And there's something very powerful about that. But I was also struck by the risks you took at that age in making that trip that was one of obviously many more to come, where you literally put your life and perhaps the lives of others in danger for a just cause. So how do you summon the courage and the confidence, and those are somewhat different, to do these things? Courage can motivate you to do things maybe yourself, but it takes courage married with confidence to bring others into it when they too may be exposed to risk. So could you talk a bit about that?
Madam President, listen to Martin Luther King Jr. on old radio. Hearing and reading about Rosa Parks, I had to act. I had to do something.
Yep.
When I was in elementary school in rural Alabama, I had a teacher who told me, read, my child, read, my child. And I tried to read everything. We had very few books at home. We couldn't afford a subscription to the local newspaper, but my grandfather had one. And each day when he was finished reading his newspaper, we would get it and read it. I wanted to be able to go to the library and check out books. Rosa Parks and Dr. King inspired me, gave me the courage to say, let's go down to the Pike County Public Library in Troy, Alabama, and try to get a library card, try to check out some books. And I just went.
But the confidence to take your siblings with you.
They looked up to me. They believed in me. They called me Robert. And they said, is Robert going? We're going. And
So did you get the library card?
at that time, I didn't get a library card. I was told that the library was for whites only and not for colors. But on July 5th, 1998, after I'd been in the Congress for 1 year, I had a book called Walking with the Wind, and the Pike County Public Library in Troy, Alabama, not the same building, had a book signing for me. And hundreds of blacks and white citizens showed up, and they gave me a library card.
How wonderful.
Well, Congressman, let the record show that on May the 24th, 2013, that the Troy Public Library, that is Troy, New York Public Library, is giving you a library.
How perfect is that? Perfect.
Thank you.
And let me read this brief note from the director of the Troy Public Library. Dear Congressman Lewis, the Troy Public Library welcomes you to Troy, New York, and to the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Your sterling history as a civil rights leader and congressman is an inspiration to us all. We know of your unfortunate experience with another Troy Public Library back in your childhood, and would like to offer you this library card from our own Troy Public Library as an indication of our esteem and also as a symbol of the changes that have come about in our country since your first attempt at procuring a library card. Public libraries are beacons of democracy, gateways to self-improvement, and true representatives of community values and shared resources. We strive to serve all members of society to the best of our ability. Please accept this library card as a token of the respect we have for you personally, but also as a symbol of the inclusive philosophy that underlies all public libraries. With best wishes, Paul Hickok, Director, Troy Public Library.
Whoa.
But thank you very much. And on my next visit, I will use it.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Now, Admiral Mullen, a minute ago, I've talked about this kind of combination of courage and confidence, but there's another kind of combination that's important along with courage, confidence, and that's persistence. Now, I hope you don't mind my telling this story, but since you told it once.
Depends.
So as a young lieutenant, so you've said, After only 2 tours at sea, you were given command of a boat, a gasoline tanker. And you said, that you ran that tanker into a buoy, which nearly tanked your career. But you had the courage, confidence, and importantly, persistence to persevere. And you've been quoted as saying it took you 11 years, but you got back on track, and the rest is history. Please tell us, and what can our students learn from that experience?
Well, if you're the captain of a ship, it's not a good idea to hit anything.
Succinct.
Absolutely.
And although I loved being the captain of a ship, even that I was 26 years old at the time, and didn't know a lot, and that was actually a good thing in my 20s, because it gave me sort of a spirit of anything was possible. When I talk about this with young leaders, I really talk about it in terms of failure, because we're all humans, and we're all going to fail. And it's much less about the failure itself than what happens with that adversity. What do we do with it? How do we get up? How do we move forward? And at that time, I actually got an evaluation, which in school terms we'd call F, except I'd say NF, no future in the Navy. But I was determined, I was very determined to command another ship. There were 2 aspects of that. One, you learn your lessons, and I'd never really failed at anything. It was also, and I talk about this as well, it was the first time my wife, we'd been married 5 years, it was the first time she'd see me fail. And so it was a pretty dramatic event on the personal front as well, as we worked our way through that. And we couldn't have done that without a mentor or 2 to navigate this huge system that the United States Navy was. But it took me 11 years to literally to establish enough of a record again to be seen as somebody that we might make a decision to command another ship. And that decision actually was the last time that could have happened. Had I not gotten what we call screened for command again, when it happened, I had no future in the Navy. So the failure piece is a big deal from my perspective. I actually failed subsequent to that as well in command of another ship. Now, I'm not advocating for a strategy of failure. But when you are in a position of leadership, and this was discussed earlier, my view is you have to understand what the risk is, but you also have to be reaching pretty far. And if it isn't nuclear power or nuclear weapons, it doesn't have to be zero defect, and it doesn't have to be perfect process. That's right. You need, and particularly in a world that's changing so quickly, you've got to be able to take the risk, understand it as best you can as a leader. But then the other thing is, which as a young captain of the ship is, you're the responsible, accountable officer. And so in the Navy, you learn pretty early when you command that when your ship goes aground, it's over. You're not there anymore. Now, I didn't go aground, I just hit a buoy. But you leave, and what I think has gotten lost in modern times is the responsibility of accountability in leaders when they really catastrophically break an institution, and it becomes more about them as individuals. Absolutely. And their complete lack of understanding of doing the right thing, so that institution can start healing in their departure, no matter how good they are or were, or being forced out by someone else, which is an accountable action, but it's not the ultimate in terms of accountable action, because that's really personal, and that institutions are unable to recover rapidly. In some cases, if it doesn't happen very quickly, if there's a big fight about it, it takes the damage and just extends it. So those are some of the leadership lessons that come out of crashing into a buoy when you're 26 years old.
Well, you know, it's interesting because, you know, Ursula had a profile done on her in a magazine called Fast Company, and your predecessor said the following about you. The thing I valued most about Ursula and why I valued her participation in senior management is that she has the courage to tell you the truth in ugly times. That's a quote by Anne Mulcahy. So, can you play that off of what the Admiral just said about
I mean, it aligns totally,
organizations?
particularly the last portion of the discussion about taking accountability and ownership of issues. Leadership is great. The heady stuff is really, you know, cool. You congressman or admiral or CEO or, you know, get all these great great titles. You get some stuff around you. People actually help you through the hallways. You don't have to carry stuff anymore. And we get really enamored by this stuff and forget what it really means. It means that there is going to be a point, almost every day, where something bad is happening, or something good is happening, but in this case, something bad is happening, where someone has to stand up and say, I got it. Often, the only person who can do that, or who should do that, is the leader. Right? And I mean, everybody in my company, I try to get them to be leaders, but there are certain things that they, you know, if somebody jumps up before they cannot possibly carry it, right? Even if they were the problem. So one of the things that we have to do today as leaders is remember the full responsibility of what it means to be one. And that also means stepping away when it's time, even when people believe it's time for you to step away, even if you don't think it's time. So I do agree with the Admiral totally. This idea that the organization is the purpose, really. You know, it's not about you. It really isn't about you. I'll be there for 7 years, 8 years. The company's been around for 75. If we do it really, really well, it'll be around for 175 more. So I'm like a little blip in time. So I have to figure out a way to lead it in such a way that its future is assured. Right? Its future is assured with all of the right tenets. And I do agree that we've kind of lost our way sometimes. When you look at public leadership today, I call it the myth of the man leader. Right? There's all these great, amazing names. And if you do it incorrectly, you generally see them crash and burn, right? You don't see the good ones. Like Bill Gates is a great guy, right? So he absolutely doesn't crash and burn. He leaves a legacy that lasts a long time. Admiral Mullen, the same, and some of our presidents, the same. But we have as many names that are just horrible because they take the air out of the room that the organization should be breathing, and they breathe it all up themselves. So I think I feel we're privileged, to be admirals and congressmen and CEOs or leaders of organizations or presidents. Think about, we're privileged. And we don't have really difficult jobs. The difficult jobs are the people out here who are keeping this country safe, right? We don't know who they are, generally. We have to ask them to stand up, right? People like the congressman who literally lays a foundation that allows me, way before he even knew I existed, allows me to, these are tough jobs. Patty, who literally says, I'm gonna actually figure out a way to utilize the fundamental great stuff that we have that makes it easy for me to engage and give and to focus my energies. Those are hard decisions. What I do today, people say, it's a really stressful job. I'm like, it's kind of tough, but it's nowhere near as hard as it sounds. I mean, these other jobs are really, really harder, a lot harder. And I actually love it because I think it's easy. It's easy because a lot of the hard work was done, right? A lot of the hard work was done. Well, now I have to actually move fast, be smart, utilize 140,000 great people, use technology, give all of the stuff that you guys have laid out for me to be able to do and for my company to be able to do, and not take it too seriously.
Patty, you're one of the most creative people I know. Now, you may not think of yourself that way, but I certainly do. You created MSNBC. That's pretty big. And you didn't tend to think big, and it's that kind of creativity of being able to do that that I've admired in what you do and how you do what you do. So how do you do that?
I think Tom Brokaw would probably mind you saying that I created MSNBC. There were an awful lot of people and all of these kinds of things that come together to make something happen. You know, most people don't even remember that the MS part of MSNBC is Microsoft and NBC. But thank you for remembering that. The thing about creativity is we can get so stuck between concerns about the past and fear of the future that we can forget to be present. And I think the one thing that we all need for creativity is to really be present, whether you're present at the lab that day or present as the CEO that day. There are 1,000 reasons to be out here or back here. And the one thing that I think all of us bring to when we really have the breakthroughs, when you really know how to use that blank sheet of paper called today, right, is don't fill it up with all the things that you, the gerbil wheel of concerns, and make the space. And it's nice to say that what we did was courageous at the Gates Foundation, but it wasn't. It was the use of a blank sheet of paper without too much concern for self, to say, we have these resources on this blank sheet of paper. What do you do? And we didn't really worry much about what everybody would say, whether we'd get the accolades. I remember thinking, history will decide whether we made the right decisions or the wrong decision. What we have to decide is, what are the big things that you could tackle? And just showing up and being present and letting the rest of that go aside, to me, is the one key for creativity for each of us. And it's something that is hard to do and so wonderful when you manage to pull it off.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Congressman Lewis, I was always, by the way, I have to tell you that Patty and I share a link in terms of being on the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institution. But it's because of that that I really got the chance to know Congressman Lewis a little bit at a dinner that was celebrating the groundbreaking for the new National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I don't know if you remember that. We were there with Laura Bush, and
Yes.
it was a great occasion.
It was a great
so
day.
I
A great
used
day.
that opportunity to rope him into coming to this troll. But having said that, I want to ask a question that is meant to link you and Admiral Mullen. But I'm going to put the questions in different ways. You crossed that Edmund Pettus Bridge, Selma to Montgomery, severely beaten. But all through that time, and to this day, you have maintained a commitment to nonviolence, when many others in the movement at the time, and I was kind of age during that time, coming of age and of age. And I saw people turn away from a nonviolent path. What kept you on it?
Well, before getting involved with the sit-ins, the Freedom Ride, the March on Washington, the March from Selma to Montgomery, we studied. We studied. We just didn't wake up one morning and say we're going to go and sit in or stand in at theaters or that we're going to march. We studied what Gandhi attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India. We studied Thoreau and civil disobedience. We studied the great religions of the world, small group of students in Nashville. And many of us grew to accept nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. And then we start talking about the beloved community. And I used to think that the only part of that beloved community was within the struggle, within the movement itself. But I've grown to see it as much larger. But it's this idea, this concept that you respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. And it doesn't matter whether someone is black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American, straight or gay. We are people, we are human beings. And I accept, because of my faith and my religious background, that is a spark of divinity in every human being. And you should respect that. And you don't have a right to destroy it.
So here's the hard question. Being a member of the U.S. Congress, there does come a time where maybe you have to vote to go to war or to support a military operation. How do you square that with the focus on nonviolence?
I support our troops. I support our men and women in uniforms. I have two brothers that served in the military. One saw action in Vietnam. 3 uncles that served in World War II. But as a human being, as a member of Congress, I said I cannot and will not vote for appropriation to go to war. It is not in keeping, if you accept the way of nonviolence, the way of peace as a way of life, then you have to say there must be some other way. Edmund, can we talk? Can we mediate? Can we negotiate? Someplace in human history, we have to come to that point saying war is absolute. It's absolute, obsolete. It is obsolete. It cannot any longer be used as a tool of our foreign policy. Can humankind emerge to another plane, to another level, where we can lay down the tools and the instruments of war and violence?
So that turns me to you. I've tended to find that no one has more of a sense of the cost of war and going to war and what that whole thing can do than military men and women themselves, particularly those who've been in leadership positions. And I know, and I'm sure that's why you focus so much on our soldiers with extraordinary injuries, lost limbs, PTSD. You've also spoken about whether you think that somehow the moral goalposts have been moved with some of what has come out of our being in this 10-year plus state of war. Abu Ghraib, other things. So I have 2 questions. One is, if you would, what are the 3 most important things you think that we can do to ease the burdens of those who have served? Because I think, as you pointed out, in Vietnam, many people blamed the soldiers. And so I think we all have a responsibility for those who do serve. But at the same time, have the moral goalposts moved?
So, just for the record, my objective in the military for over 43 years has been to generate peace, not create conflict. The political leadership in our country makes this decision.
Exactly.
Not the military. And I have great respect for your decision, which is very consistent with who you are as a human being. And again, when I talk to young people about leadership, you always must, in the most difficult of circumstances, stay true to yourself. Otherwise, you can't do this, what I call mirror test. The next day, look in the mirror and say, gee, it's still okay. So tying yourself to the integrity of who you are and what you believe is a very important part for any leader. It's kind of interesting hearing the discussion about philanthropy and the exposure of needs, much broader horizons than those that are close. And I certainly agree with that because of technology and information flow. Although when I think of this, I was heavily involved in Haiti. And when the Klieg lights went out in Haiti, we stopped going, and the money stopped as well. So for me, and I take that as a major example, and Haiti's got a rich history of challenges that many of us that know a little bit about it, it's not going to be solved easily. But I do worry about what I'll even call the feel-good aspect of this. I could send money and it's okay without really knowing what that money is or isn't doing. And in the space I'm in right now, which is veteran space, there are 50,000 501c3s. I have, since these wars started, met Americans that want to help, and they just ask me, what can I do? And it's very difficult to match up the opportunity to support someone with those who want to support. And I'm spending a significant amount of my time trying to figure that out right now. And in the philanthropic area, I actually was invited to Denver 3 years ago now, I think, to speak at the Council of Foundations, which are the biggest foundations in the country. And I basically told the story about the military and the challenges, the PTS, the traumatic brain injury, mild and severe, the stress that families are going through. If my wife were sitting here, there are families where the mothers can't get out of bed in the morning. The depression is significant. This is tied to the loneliness and the deployments and the stress. And Tom Brokaw wrote a wonderful column a couple years ago that, you close the blinds and you do not want to see that uniform walking into your front yard to give you that fatal knock on the door that you've lost a son or a daughter or a husband or a wife. But then this goes back to what I said earlier. America doesn't know, I don't think, our men and women and truly the sacrifices that they have generated for our country. And they're going to need opportunity. They don't want a hand out at all. They just want an opportunity. So I'm pressing people like Ursula and others they need jobs.
It's a big deal.
Education. I focus it on three things: jobs, education, and health. Their dreams haven't changed at all. They still want to own a piece of the rock, send their kids to good schools, and two incomes, as is the case in the vast majority of families in the country. So, and I don't believe that can be done from Washington. I believe it's got to be done locally, customized in communities throughout the country. As 87% of the people that join the military return to those communities, they don't stay in historically. They're coming out right now at 1,000 a day. We're hiring them at roughly 100 a day in a very tough market. So big companies who've hired tens of thousands in some cases, it's terrific, but we're just denting it. Yep. Those efforts have to be accelerated. And they're a good bet because they have the discipline, they've led, they performed under pressure, they're team players, they're loyal, and once they get their wings in a new organization, they'll fly by themselves. So we're working very hard on that, and employment for their spouses who are equally remarkable. So we're working very hard on that. Yes, there are challenges with homelessness. We actually in Vietnam generated a significant homeless population, but it was 10 years late. We're doing it at a faster rate now at the 4 or 5 year point than we did in Vietnam. And we have, with 15% women, we have an exceptional number of female homeless vets, and of course, they have the children. And the VA and the 501c3s are not geared for women, homeless, veterans at this point. They will be at some point. So we try to highlight some of those challenges, but it takes local leaders to really understand who understand their community to really go out and dig into these issues. The whole issue of post-traumatic stress, the brain injuries, which will be with us for an awful long time, and I'm stunned that in 2013 we know so little about the brain. I mean, I really applaud what the president did recently when he went after he laid in $100 million for the brain research. I mean, we know almost nothing about the brain, which is a stunning thing to me in the 21st century. There are many initiatives underway, but we need leaders to grab these. I mean, I'm obviously biased, but these are people who've sacrificed, in many cases, sacrificed it all. And this is the first check we ought to write for the country.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Agreed.
Let me just, because you were talking about philanthropy, I have been 100% unsuccessful at penetrating philanthropy in this space. I can't, and to me it seems very set in its ways, whatever it is. I just haven't been able to break through.
Patty, you want
So I need some help, Patty.
comment there?
Sorry.
No, I mean, I have to say, I don't know about the rest of you, but the 1,000 a day, 100 have jobs, is such an astonishing number. Yeah. And I know that being proud to be part of the Amazon board, that there are corporations that are taking this seriously, but that's quite a gap. Yeah. And so you're talking about you're talking about big foundations because this does appeal to the individual donors?
I'm not sure. I mean, I've really run into this wall from lots of different directions.
We have to talk.
I cannot break through.
Right.
All right, we'll do that over.
I need to understand this better. Yeah. We are talking, but you probably don't all want to.
But Patty, you actually, maybe not specifically targeted to veterans, but you do work with people, and serve people who are homeless. I'm not sure that many people in this audience know what Martha's Table is. Could you just tell us?
Well, Martha's Table, like so many community-based organizations in this country, is a 33-year-old organization started by a priest and a social worker that really wanted to do something about the children they saw without supports on the street and the homeless families. And it is at the corner of 14th and V in Washington, D.C., serving 60,000 meals a month prepared in groceries to families that both the homeless population in D.C., which is far larger than it should be, and we could talk about that a lot, but we meet basic needs, so meeting people where they are with their needs for clothing, hunger, and supports for finding housing. But then we also believe, as everyone here does, that education is the way to break the cycle of poverty. And so I have the pleasure of going to work every day with 120 children that start at 6 weeks old and go up to 3 years old in an effort to ensure that low-income working families have a place, a safe and enriched place. So it's part of really just DC responding, and it doesn't get large government monies. It gets a little bit of money for child care vouchers, but the majority of Martha's Table runs on that $100, $50, $25 a month check of a community that says it's not okay to live in this city without doing something about what I call the barbell syndrome we have in DC, where there's a population of wealthy, well-connected folks, and then a large population of people with no connections, no opportunity for jobs and meeting their basic needs. So it's a classic community-based organization with a big view that everyone should have the opportunity to live a healthy and productive life. And that's what I was doing in one way at Gates Foundation, and now I'm getting my boots dirty and learning firsthand how to leave PowerPoint and white papers behind and see what it's like for the thousands of families that we serve, standing with them and learning what it really takes to turn that around.
Well, you know, it's interesting because, Admiral Mullen talked about how little we understand about the brain. And of course, I educate engineers and scientists and those in related fields. And I'm a big believer in the power of, basic research and technological innovation to help to elevate people and elevate their lives. But I also know that Ursula is an equally strong proponent. And, you've led some major corporate efforts in that regard. You're as well an engineer, which people here love. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're trying to do there?
Well, I got engaged in this. First of all, I'm fortunate to join a company that has a long history and belief and structure around access to education for the broader set of the population. Xerox happens to be their major social philanthropy focus. And I joined this company and happen to have a similar alignment. And so, people say, oh, I'm so proud of what you're doing. I'm just actually, on the back of the horse, just riding with everybody else. But how did I get really committed to this? I was born and raised in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, single mother, brother older, sister younger, literally raised in one of the worst physical environments that you can imagine, outside of our house. I mean, it was a tough neighborhood. People say tough neighborhood, and people say that they were poor. We lived in a tough neighborhood, and we were really poor. And my mother made it very clear that that was just where we were. It had nothing to do with who we were. And she would say this all the time to me. This just happens to be where you are. It's not who you are. And remember that, she said, when you're rich and famous. And she didn't have any clue. And by the way, that last part of the statement, I'll come back to it, has had more impact than the first part. Okay? But so after I became, good in math, or I thought I was great in math until I went to college and realized that the guys who were around me, they were all guys, were really good at math. I was just not really well prepared. I went to an all-girl Catholic school in a pretty bad neighborhood. I went to the school because my mother was Catholic, but also because it was safe and pretty contained. And
that's okay, because I'm a physicist, because I hadn't done any proofs in algebraic topology by the time I was a freshman in college.
Yeah. And I was supposed to be a chemical engineer, and I didn't like chemistry, so I went to mechanical engineering. So, but this is exactly part of the issue that I realized. So I became an engineer. I went to work at a great company and never left it, and the rest, as I say, is history. But think about the beginning. This was total luck, total disorganized luck. I happened to go to a good school or a marginal school, the best school in a very bad neighborhood, which made it a marginal school in any other neighborhood. I happened to have a mother who actually was persistent and clear. She had no clue what an engineer did. All she knew is that an education was really probably a good idea. She also knew that self-responsibility was an important thing. And I happened to have, a pretty good environment inside my house. And I go to a school, I happen to line up to the right degree, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's one set of facts. The next set of facts is that we have a huge need for scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians, and we have a huge gap in that area. You say, this is interesting. Third set of facts is if you become a scientist, technologist, engineer at math, you probably can make $75,000, $80,000 to start, and the rest of your life will be probably pretty good. So you see, you have these three facts. You say to yourself, why aren't we just running towards the doors to create all these people that are called STEM people? We have an infrastructural problem, which I'll get to. But the other thing is we have a fame problem. This is a luck thing, right? So you get a kid in school, and they learn how to bounce a ball and throw it and hit it and all kinds of stuff. And they know exactly who those people are who are really famous in those areas. We actually can create and should be creating Bill Gateses and Jeff Bezos, and we should be creating these people because the world needs them. And lots of them. They don't need, there's only like one LeBron James. I love him, and I can watch him all day, but he's really, really, really special. And while we hope that our kids are going to be really, really, really special, they're probably just going to be okay. So why don't we that's good enough. By the way, okay in this country is phenomenal. Why aren't we preparing more of our children to take part in this great opportunity to solve amazing problems? We actually leave it up to luck. So one of the things I decided to do early was to take the luck out of it and say, well, why is it that people don't know who won the Nobel Prize in chemistry last year? They know who won the Super Bowl. They know who the quarterback was. They know who won the most valuable player in the NBA, all this stuff like that. We should make it as popular as to be a contributing member of the broader society as we do this small society. So my whole push has been on, it can't be luck. It cannot be luck, so let's get out there and start talking. Let's get out there and start talking. Let's get out there and start understanding what the gap is. And the gaps are huge, by the way. Yeah. You know, we have early childhood education gaps. We have STEM competency gaps in teachers. You know, I thought all you had to do was kind of start screaming. Everybody would kind of line up and it would be solved. That was 15 years ago we started this, and we still haven't made a lot of progress. But I do believe that if we, as we make progress, because we are making some in this area, we will improve the lives of a very diverse set of citizens in this country, and we will improve the lifestyle of everybody in this country and the world. And so it seems to be like a really good thing to do, and so that's what it's on. I mean, and no rocket science, nothing too big about it. We try to find programs, change the equation, this thing that the president asked to be started. We picked the name. He said, you guys are spending lots of money on this area, but you guys seem to be not making as much progress as you would think you would make if you added all the money together, federal money, state money, private sector money on education. You would think that we would have the best educated citizenry in the world. We don't. Plain and simple, we don't. The guys who come to this school are the talented 10th. They are the 10% of the talented 10th. And they should be able to, and why don't we have more? We have to start preparing earlier. I'm actually preaching now, but it's such a frustrating problem because people say to me, it's hard. And I say, what's hard? Math is hard, writing is hard, it's not that hard. I mean, and if it is hard, we can teach you how to do it. I mean, we teach people how to do it. You learn how to speak, you learn how to drive a car, you learn, you know. So it's not actually hard. It's not so far out of reach. It's not that you're gonna go blindly down this road and not know where you're gonna end up. Actually, it's all of the facts around this would call for a simple run towards. We should have most Americans saying, I want to be an engineer. I want to be a scientist. And we have most of them saying, I want to be a basketball player. And you say to yourself, by the way, I love basketball and baseball and golf, but the chances of you changing your life and being successful to the examples that we see on TV are worse than you can hit the lottery faster. So why don't you just do something that's a little bit easier? And it's a little bit more defined path. So for all of you in the audience, and this is speaking to the Catholics in church, right? I mean, but for all of you in the audience, if you have kids, then line them up. But if you don't have kids or your kids are all set up, go to the school. That's what we tell our employees, go to the school. This is not this big thing about an organization. Go walk into a school, any school, and just talk to the principal or the teacher or whoever will listen and say, I'm here to help. And my help here is where you need help. In organization, and I don't know what, serving lunches, I'm here to help. Because if I can help in wherever you need help, then we can start focusing the money that you have in the places that you should be focused, which is in science, technology, engineering, and math. By the way, we need readers, we need writers, you know, we need artists, but right now we create a lot more of those than we seem to need. We don't create enough engineers. I don't think it's bad to be a lawyer or a finance person, but we have a lot more of those than we need right now. So I just think it's a complicated problem, but it shouldn't be as complicated to solve. And it's
well, is it possible, Edward? Is it possible or conceivable that a lot of the young men and young women that are returning from the war, that they can come and serve as teachers and role models in the classroom? Yeah. You go in a lot of the inner city schools, you don't see a male teacher. Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a great need. Can we redirect some of our resources to prepare and train these men and women to be teachers?
There has been a very active Troops to Teachers program, probably 10 to 15 years to do this. just because of what you just said, that they are great role models, and they are by and large geared to serve, and they want to make a difference. So it might be possible to accelerate that. I mean, in terms of numbers, given where we are right now. I mean, the 1,000 that are coming out is not an unusual number. This is the number, you know, we're gonna, for the next 3 years, it's about 1 million troops that will get out of the military. That's normal. I mean, that's with the attrition.
It's the 100 a day only that
Exactly,
find the right thing.
exactly.
And it's a bad economy, it's a down
It's a bad
economy.
right.
And that's, so
Yeah.
generally there would be an economy that can actually suck them
And
up
they
at a
can't.
higher rate. They can't do it
They
today.
can't do it. That's
By the way,
the problem.
on the teacher, on the troops and employment issue, it is one of the most focused areas for the business leaders today, thanks to people like Admiral Mullen and the First Lady, a lot of people who are screaming at us saying,
Yep.
"Oh, what are you doing?" I mean, these are people who actually, they have proven themselves. This is, I mean, I don't mean just by being brave. They've proved, they organize things, they lead, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some credentialing work that has to be done, that the government is doing, but the business community has to, and we are, literally take this up and say, we're going to be biased. This is a bad thing. People don't like these words, but we're going to be biased towards veterans.
Well, here we are. Now, I'm going to do a Clinton-esque thing here. I'm a fan of Bill Clinton. You know, here we have you, and you were a pioneer in interactive media. Congressman Lewis raised, I think, an important question about veterans as teachers. But you've talked about STEM education, and then you talked about the needs of the military, and presumably education and is a key part of that. And we talked earlier about technology, and you know, the whole MOOCs movement.
Yep.
I actually think we have an opportunity to put some minds together here to think about the role of technology in helping to accelerate education for opportunity, for retraining, bringing the business and the philanthropic communities together, and obviously the educational community.
Is that,
And
is
so-
this MOOCs an education acronym?
It's massive.
It's massively open online courses, but there's now, people talk about POCs and SPOCs, scalable, packaged online courses. I prefer SPOCs. since
We
I
do,
was a-
we do acronyms pretty well in the military,
right,
that's
so,
why.
yeah. So I
Well,
think,
MOOCs, just so you know, are not universally beloved.
no,
in
they're
this
not.
area. Just-
But we actually here feel that we have a unique opportunity to
Good.
do things that can apply in each of these arenas.
Good.
But having said that, I think it's time for us to hear from the audience. What do you think?
I think it's a good idea.
So we're going to open it up to some questions from the public. We invited people to email us questions in advance, but you know, we also have questions that are tweeted to us by the audience, and they will miraculously appear before me. But they will miraculously appear before me. But we know that many of you came out here in the rain. So we're going to start with questions from the physical audience. And the microphones are in the aisle, so please come forward and with your questions. Hello, Congressman Tonko.
Hello, Brother Paul. Good to see you. Great congressman. It's my friend. It's my brother.
An engineer.
And the engineer.
Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jackson, first of all, for assembling such a distinguished panel. Certainly has been enlightening. My name is Dr. Pamela Harper. I'm a graduate of RPI's Lally School of Management's doctoral program. And my dissertation actually explored the impact and the nature of philanthropy based on corporations. And much of the discussion has focused more on philanthropy by individuals at varying levels of wealth. And so my question, I just am asking that the panel and perhaps Ms. Stonecipher, if you might comment on your views on the appropriateness and perhaps even the impact of corporate social responsibility or corporate philanthropy, whether cash-based and or in kind. Thank you.
Speak to it, Ursula. Let me let Ursula start.
Good.
I think that what you will find in most corporations in America, I think probably globally, but definitely in America, there is a long-standing, fairly well-funded, not necessarily well-directed, but that's something that we can work on, history of philanthropy, both in cash, so yes, and in kind, meaning either the technology or the service they provide being given, but also their employees actually giving their time, allowing their employees to actually give their time and their energies. I think so. So I think that we have a good history and model there. The thing that we're focused on now, not only me but corporations now, is that we're trying to get a little bit more specific and organized in how we give. It's a little bit the model that Patty has used, or that the people at Microsoft used when they got together and said, well, what are we going to focus on? We have a lot of, what we're finding in the industry is that everybody has their favorite thing. Favorite thing is generally local and not scaled. And there's not a whole lot of measures necessarily around whether it works or not. Seems to be pretty good, makes you feel good, but it doesn't really have a line towards some set of outputs. And so what we're doing now in industry more and more, particularly in the area of STEM, this is something that we're definitely focused on in the area of STEM, to actually assure that we continue the giving. It's at a good level. We're not looking for more money. There's not a need for more money. There's a need for better organization and better outcomes-driven donations, and that's something that we're working on. Patty?
So I think that this whole area of corporate social responsibility kind of has gone through a couple of dips and valleys, and if you did your dissertation on it, you should probably answer the question more than me. But I will say that I think that the wisest business leaders are thinking of it more than philanthropy, and as Ursula was saying, the idea that it starts with concerns about human capital. Whatever you're doing, you're going to need great people, and you're going to need a community and a nation that produces great people. What are you doing about human capital? And that would include things like, what are you doing about veterans and others? The second thing, of course, is what are you doing to create a strong community for your employees to live in? Then what are you doing to ensure that your company and product and footprint is supportive of the needs of the environment? And then the broader issues of other ways that you can affect issues around the globe that are coherent with your corporate ethics and values and beliefs, but perhaps go further. So I think what we're talking about, I hope, is a new era where to be a CEO of a company and to be what anyone would call a leading company, it is a company that accepts its shared responsibility and not just serving the shareholders, but serving that broader stakeholder of the community, the nation, and the planet. And I think that, 20 years from now, when President Jackson asked another panel here if it was all corporate leaders, that's all there would be. Today, Ursula gets a lot of praise for being that kind of corporate leader. Let's hope that that's not an exceptional situation in 20 years, that this idea of social responsibility by corporations is just an assumption. And I think we're on the way, but not there yet.
Let me hear from this gentleman.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. My name is Kevin Coughlin. My wife and I, Dominica, are part of the RPI Parents Council. We have met many times over the past 5 years. My son is in the co-terminal program. First of all, I want to thank you for your leadership here at RPI. This is a wonderful institution. You have been a terrific leader, and we have been blessed to be a part of this community.
Thank
I want to thank you for this forum today.
Thank you.
On this Memorial Day weekend, I think it's most appropriate that we are talking about veterans. My 35 years of professional life has been as a chief probation officer for the Massachusetts Trial Court. I'm also a local elected official as a city councilor in the city of Presidents, as we call it, Quincy, Massachusetts. We have a lot of issues with veterans, both in the court system and certainly as a community. And I suppose this question is perhaps most directed to Admiral Mullen. Admiral Mullen, thank you for your service. One of the issues that I didn't hear spoken about in terms of returning veterans is something that we see in the court system a lot, and that is the issue of substance abuse. We know the impact of PTSD and the other challenges that veterans face, but substance abuse is something that we see that has not been addressed, I don't think, as comprehensively, both within the service and by the veterans institutions as a whole. And it is something that also presents itself as a bar to veterans becoming reemployed once they join the general population again. Can you speak to your impressions of that issue within the military and the treatment for veterans as they return home?
I think it's a great point, and we are not close to where we need to be in addressing those issues up front and in the service. A good friend of mine, actually from Pittsfield, runs a homeless center and has been very active. His name is Jack Downey. He's been very active in the veterans homeless space for some time. And what Jack told me when I first met him 4 or 5 years ago is what he's finding is veterans find themselves, he finds potential homeless vets showing up with 7 prescriptions from the VA. So not unlike, and this is important, not unlike America right now, which is over-medicated in many ways, we continue to be a microcosm of the country that has been stressed to a fairly well in combat in what so many have been through. We are stigmatized in a sense that we won't ask for help. It is the availability, and actually you see what I would call the migration from one drug to another as one either becomes focused on, can't get it as easily, and move to another one. So it's a huge issue for us. We are terribly short of mental health professionals, as we are in America. And while we've hired thousands, we're still significantly short. And sort of that combination of expertise, stigma, the stress, et cetera, it will take somebody that certainly doesn't have a strong underpinning and can easily end up exactly where you see them. The other thing, because of where you work, that I've advocated for, and with some success, is we need veterans courts throughout the country. Just like family courts, courts that are essentially veterans knowledgeable, not necessarily friendly, but at least you're talking the same language and you have the background to make a judgment about somebody that is standing in front of you rather than just you're here and you're in jail. So you raise a great point. We have much to do to get at this, and it's been particularly intense because of the wars.
Well, thank you for your answer. Yeah. And we have undertaken those in the greater Boston area, those veterans courts, and they are proving very helpful because they are sensitized to the specific challenges that veterans face. But thank you again, and thank you for the opportunity to ask the question.
Thank you. We're going to take 2 questions here, and then we're going to take 2 from the screen here, please.
Hi, I'm Chris Bystroff from the Associate Professor of Biology, and I have a question for Patricia Stonecipher. Overpopulation, global overpopulation is recognized as a cause of problems ranging from poverty, political unrest, starvation, and war, and climate change. And yet, it rarely makes it into the public forum, and it's rarely talked about. And the Gates Foundation is one of the few exceptions where they've been talking about this issue and promoting reproductive rights and promoting innovation in contraception. I would like to know what sort of barriers you've run up against in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in this effort, which I think is very noble. and yet it's not being followed largely by other foundations and government agencies.
Well, thank you. I do think that a woman's right to decide when she has a child and how many she has and when to stop having children is an important right, whether you're in Troy, New York, Troy, Alabama, or Mozambique. And we worked, I have to be perfectly transparent here, we worked on this issue from the very beginning and didn't talk about it that much. It isn't easy to talk about, especially when you're trying to get folks from both sides of the aisle to do things together, whether it's around American education reform and STEM and others, because the whole idea of a women's reproductive choices is still a polarizing topic in so many places. So I believe there are more people working on it than speaking about it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't all be speaking about it. And I'm pleased to see the cooperation between all of the UN agencies and many of the local governments and even church leaders around the world. Not all church leaders, there are some notable exceptions, recognizing that a family's ability to take care of its family and make the choices for when they are prepared to have families is a positive one. We are seeing positive trends, as you probably are aware, in many regions in family size, and at the same time those positive trends are accompanied by higher education and improved health. And so we have lots of hope that that will continue a cycle of improvement in this area. I do think more people are working on this. I think more people need to, and we need to respect that people might have differences, but talk about it anyway.
Thank you.
Congressman Tonko.
President Jackson, Dr. Jackson, I echo the sentiments about your leadership. RPI is fortunate to have graces of your sound leadership, but so is this general community, the greater capital region and the state. So thank you very much. And to the five of you, this is excellent colloquy, and you inspire great thinking. So it's been a great panel. Congratulations, Brother John, on your library card.
But thank you. Thank you very much, Brother Paul. I will come back and use it some other time. Just invite me, okay?
Absolutely. You're always invited. It is a joy to serve with this gentleman. He's an icon of history, and every day I cherish the thoughts of serving with Representative John Lewis. And you rightfully focused on his method to reform, change produced through nonviolence. My question is, how do we move to the next step where we can't seem to produce change against violence, which is gripping our society and killing our children?
Well, I agree that there's too much violence in our society. And I may get in trouble, Brother Paul. I don't like getting into real trouble. First of all, there's too many guns. Just too many guns. We need to start teaching our children, our young people, at a very, very age, almost before they are even born, the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. Sometimes, Dr. Jackson, I feel like we have lost our way. We don't know how to say, excuse me. Pardon me, forgive me, I'm sorry. One of the individuals that beat my seatmate during the Freedom Rides in 1961, when we arrived in South Carolina, back in 1961, the same year that President Barack Obama was born, black people and white people couldn't be seated together on a Greyhound bus. And a month after the president was inaugurated, one of the guys came to my office in February '09 and said, Mr. Lewis, I'm one of the people that attacked you and your seatmate and left you in a pool of blood. His son came with him and said, will you forgive me? I apologize. I said, I accept your apology. I forgive you. He started crying. His son started crying. I started crying.
Yeah, I'm going to start crying now.
And we called each other brothers. I saw him 4 different times. That's what the movement all. Can we teach people to be reconciled and lay down the burden of hate and conflict? Just be human. Just be human. Maybe that's something that the scientists, researchers can do with the brain.
Well,
I don't know.
I think we have to do something with the heart.
With the heart. I
Yeah,
think you're right,
that's
Dr.
right.
Jackson, with the heart.
You have any thoughts on that, Admiral?
I worry, on my first deployment in 1969, which was to Vietnam, in the waters off Vietnam, but the first port visit was Hong Kong, and I pull into Hong Kong and I see this little tin hut, which is essentially nailed up to the wall there, and there are 14 people living in this, a family of 14. And it was stunning to me. I mean, I just hadn't seen that kind of poverty. And Hong Kong, which is a wonderful city, but it immediately became, for me, this city of haves and have-nots. And that has always stuck with me, and I've seen haves and have-nots all over the world right through the time that I retired, in countries all over the world. What I haven't seen before recently is the number of discussions in our own country about haves and have-nots, which is alarming to me for a country that I just never expected to be having these kinds of discussions. And we've talked about the keys, and I actually think the biggest vulnerability we've got as a country in the long run is our K through 12 education. And we've been talking about it a long time, and if we don't figure it out, we're not going to be the country that we even think we should be, much less will be or could be. And we're running out of time. We're running out of time. We're running through generations in that regard. And certainly, as a nonpartisan individual that spent a lot of time in Washington in the last 10 or 15 years, the seeming vitriol and personal, I won't say hate, but it's borderline, it's on sort of that end of the spectrum from both sides of the aisle on certain issues, which are always very emotional issues, is doing nothing for our country. Absolutely nothing except letting us continue to evolve. So that it's going to take leadership to solve these incredibly difficult problems while respecting our rights, respecting our Constitution, and probably more than anything else, respecting each other as human beings.
If I can say something
Please.
about the gun issue. You know, I happen to be born and raised in a city. So in a city, guns are, if you're not a criminal, kind of not something that you have around. Either you're a criminal, a cop, or just a person who doesn't have a gun, generally. And the discussion is kind of illogical, therefore, to me. And I'm not going to stand on either side. My side is that I don't think you should have guns, and other people think that you should. I think that the biggest thing that's shocking me today is how ridiculous the conversation has become. It's not even a conversation that you can engage and have a reasonable conversation because of the way it's phrased. It's phrased in these black and white areas. Nothing in the world, nothing in the world fits in those spaces that's not absolutely basic. And I'm not sure if we're pushing the conversations into these areas so we don't solve it, personally. So we keep this kind of ridiculous level of conversation going while we have people who have guns who shouldn't, we have types of guns that don't make a lot of sense in a civilized society. There's all kinds of things that you should get a background check. Seems to be fairly logical to me. I mean, there's some things that I just don't understand. I listen on TV and say, I don't get it. I mean, it seems to be a pretty straightforward, my husband tells me all the time, You simplify everything. I say, well, you complicate everything. I mean, so I think this is one of these things that you should put in the simplified column. And we should talk about it from the simplified perspective. And I think if we do that, you would say, where we stand today is probably not good. Let's move towards the other end somehow or the other. I don't know.
I'll take a point of personal privilege here. You know, I grew up in Washington, D.C., in what today would be called the inner city. But
it used to be called the ghetto then.
Yeah, it was called the ghetto then. But there were no guns. That was before the big advent. And frankly, there were not the drugs. So, you know, I grew up there, and not one person died, except for one boy who was struck by lightning in a thunderstorm. So that's what I have to say about it.
Absolutely.
Let me hear from here.
Hello. I have a question that addresses both the creativity side and the commitment side of this colloquy. And I was wondering if you could give some insight into how you pursue an idea that maybe one or more mentors does not agree with.
Find a different mentor. It's one way. It's not the most practical solution to the problem, but.
That's pretty good.
Very good.
I think it's good. I agree with you.
I think we all agree.
But if you've got an idea that you are just passionate and convicted about, you have to stay with it.
Yeah.
And what you'll see in organizations is particularly there's not immediate resonance, you'll see the rest of the organization treat you like a disease and, you know, try to inoculate you from having an effect on the organization. And I would argue that the more of that goes on, probably the better your idea is, and you need to stay with that in a time where we need particularly young people with ideas to move the needle in the world that we're living on. So and you do need additional help, so the new mentor is certainly probably required, but I just encourage you to stay with it.
Well, actually, that plays into a question that came in. And the question is this: how do we create a culture that encourages individuals to take risks and to explore creatively when the fear of failure overwhelms? Ursula.
Yeah, I think that I think looking at the status quo, one of the things I say to my kids a lot is very few things are the way that you want it. The only thing that makes you settle into being the way that it is that you're lazy. And you don't want to change it. I mean, lazy, not a negative statement, but you're kind of, it's okay. It's not, it's okay. We'll just kind of hang out there. And I think that there are a lot of things, not everything in the world, that being impatient is a really important thing. So I just say, you know, go, either you're going to live where you are, the way that you are, in the surroundings that you are, so on and so on, that's set by somebody else generally. And if you want to do that, then go for it. And, you know, don't complain a lot. Or you start little and start stepping out a little bit. You know, step out a little bit. You'll find that, I always say, you know, when I was raising myself when I was being raised through the company, I found that if I did somebody else's job, very few people said stop. It's kind of interesting. When you start doing something, people don't say, oh, don't you dare do that. So I said, oh, it's interesting. Let's keep trying to do more and more and more and more. And eventually somebody may tell you to stop because you're, like I said, building a nuclear power plant without process. But generally, people don't really push back against people who are willing to move forward because a lot of people just don't want to move forward themselves. So if you're one of these people if you're sitting in a place that you're not willing to invest some time to actually do a little bit more of work, then be settled in the place that you're in and don't complain. And most of the world, my kids do it all the time. They don't like the people walk with their cell phones with their head down. I said, well, do something about this. You can talk to people, send out create some kind of a blog or something and say, let's, a manners blog, instead of just complaining about it all the time. So do something to change it. Most of the time, I tell you, Dr. Jackson, the risk is so small.
Yes.
It is so small. We actually get so invested with the status quo that we think the risk is massive. Most people don't care. If you go an inch further, they actually say, please, thank you very much. Thank you for taking that on.
You know, I agree with you so much. I said to young people, to students, elementary school students, middle school, high school, don't be afraid.
Just go for it.
Be courageous.
Yeah.
Just do it. What would our country be like if Rosa Parks had said,
Too hard.
It's too hard, it's too difficult? What would it be like if Martin Luther King Jr. had said, you nominated me to be the head of this organization? Go for it. Just do it.
Yeah.
Find a way to get in the way.
Yeah, find a way to get in the way.
Find a way.
That's a good way to do it.
Let me hear from this young man.
Hi, my name is Peter, and I'm from Truro, New York, and I want to thank you for having this colloquy today. It's very interesting and
Well, thank you for
thought-provoking.
being here.
Yeah, it's really cool. I especially want to thank Congressman Lewis. You're somebody that I've learned about in history, and I feel just privileged to be in the same room with you. So thank you very much. It's really amazing to be here. And also, we've talked about kind of like the barbell syndrome and the haves and the have-nots. And I'm a college student right now, and one of the things that I notice on college campuses is I sort of feel like if you're really wealthy, that's great because your parents can pay for school. If you're really poor, that's not great, but at least you can maybe get a scholarship and that can help you out. But there's this big crunch on the middle class, and a lot of them are having a really hard time financing their children's education. And I'm curious, in kind of a more global way, how philanthropy, how the federal government, how private institutions, how the military, how business, how can all of us as a society work together to achieve like a greater equality of opportunity for everybody?
Great.
That's a great question.
Great question.
Just zip down the line.
No, I actually would love to turn this back to our beloved leader here, because I do think it scares me, the cost of a college education. I got my degree from IU Purdue Fort Wayne with 2 young children, and had dropped out of school and got back in while working, and I didn't get the kind of education that folks here got. But I was able, because of the economy that we were in, to make that not matter that much. It ended up being about my personal just do it philosophy. I'm not sure that's true. A great education is more and more essential and more out of reach. So what are we going to do to both control the cost as well as increase the access? And I think that there's nobody on this panel that's thought about this more than Dr. Jackson. So will you answer that one?
Sure. Well, first, I think we all have a role to play, including those who seek higher education. So let me just talk about the parts. Rensselaer is not a very wealthy institution, contrary to appearances. But we do believe very strongly in having opportunity for those who have the talent and the motivation to seek the kind of education we provide. It is an expensive education because of the role of technology in educating those who would be scientists, engineers, mathematicians, and technologists. And so there's a higher price point. But we use our resources to the maximum extent we can to offset that cost to young people. So the first thing is the price is not the cost. And in fact, over 85% of our student body is on some form of need-based financial aid. So, and those who work for me, and there are a bunch of them sitting out there, they will tell you that, I get accused of corporatizing the university because we run it like it is on the financial side, a business, in order to be as efficient and effective as we can be. And because of that, our staff to student and staff to faculty ratio is one of the smallest in the country. So that means people are working real hard here. Having said that, the budget of a university never closes without philanthropy, without partnerships, without philanthropy either in the form of past philanthropy, which is reflected in the endowments of universities, particularly those that have great wealth, or without current philanthropy. But as well, people have to understand education as a broader public good. And so it's not just about the universities squeezing as much as they can. And there are ways that universities can be more efficient. And, I would like to think we're on the leading edge of that. But it is about what we envision as our society. But as well, those who seek higher education have to think about what it means to them. And so when I went to college, and I went to MIT, very much like RPI. And I had a scholarship from a company called Martin Marietta, which is today Lockheed Martin, part of Lockheed Martin. And I also had a scholarship from a Masonic lodge, and then I had a small book scholarship from my church. At the same time, my father worked 2 jobs to make up the difference. And I worked as well to make up the difference. In fact, I call myself a weigher of rats and a feeder of chickens. I worked in a nutrition lab, and those were the animals that they work with. And so it was an all-in thing because higher education was so important in our family and so important to my father. And he essentially he worked in the post office all day, and he drove a taxi all night. And he devoted all of the money he made driving that taxi to paying for my education. And so when my younger sister came along to go to college, there was a little pressure to keep her from going where she wanted. She wanted to go to the University of Michigan, and she had been admitted. She was a great student. And I came home one day from college, and I'm talking and I'm excited about what I'm doing. And she burst into tears because she was going to a local school that was cheaper. So I told my parents I would just quit because it wasn't fair. So my mother worked to devote what she made. And my sister ended up going to the University of Michigan and then ultimately graduating from the law school there. So it is an all-in thing that we need educated people in this country. And those who are in government have to understand that, I believe, because it is one of those things that have to do with the greater society and what kind of society do we want. And so at the same time, those like me who have the privilege of leading higher education institutions have to run them as well and as efficiently as we can, but to provide as excellent an education as we can, and to devote as many resources as we can to creating access. But those who benefit from the educated workforce, the corporations and so on, have a role as well. And so we have to have more conversations like this in order for us to understand the role that we all have. And so that is my answer to your question.
Thank you.
I feel that mathematics is not really taught well in America. I feel that it should be real world so that children and adults should know mathematics and so forth. And I feel that the concept should be taught to our children so they have better education in college in their community. Also, the other question I have, I hope that the gridlock will get out of Congress so that we have a better country and so forth?
Well, I'll leave that one to the Congress.
Sir, the only thing I can say, I hope so too. I will do my part, Brother Paul will do his part, but sometime I think we need to have a nonviolent workshop in the Congress and bring the Democrats and the Republicans together. And I think you'll agree, Brother Paul. Okay?
Now, here's a question that came over the transom. It says, do you think healthcare development and proliferation can be the next job creator?
Proliferation.
Proliferation of healthcare?
Let's just hope that is what is meant.
Yeah.
The answer is absolutely. It's part of this science, technology, engineering, and math. This is a train running, so it's part of this train. We have 7 billion people. We have the barbells happening with these 7 billion people, right? So we have a small amount of them who can have access to just about anything that they would need to prolong their life, increase their health and prolong their life. And which is a good thing, I guess. By the way, I think it is a good thing. It's not totally clear if it is a good thing. Because on the other side, we have some basic needs of people, just basic needs, not being, we haven't solved maybe we should spend as much money trying to solve the basic needs problem, right? But I think that, yeah, healthcare is a big deal. In our company, Xerox Corporation, we made copiers for a long time. We still make printers and stuff, but we have a $2 billion, almost from a standing start, healthcare business. In just managing data around healthcare and matching together treatments and trying to get better outcomes, using data to get better outcomes on behalf of a lot of people who have this information. So yeah, it is a freight train running right now. It's creating lots of jobs.
Well, health data analytics is a big deal here.
Yeah, good.
And we have a Center for Biotechnology and Interdisciplinary Studies. That's a presidential factoid kind of had to throw in. So it's a big, we do think there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of opportunity to have data-driven solutions to healthcare questions that can in fact take costs out of healthcare while improving outcomes.
One of the things I want to throw to Patty is this idea about if we can extend the life of humans by 10 years, which is, I read somewhere in something that's the, on the rate that we're going to extend the life of the average human by 10 years. It's not only healthcare, it's better water, et cetera, better, foods, and not necessarily better foods, but safer foods. If you do that, and we're going to run out of space even faster than we thought, right? So part of the challenge, I don't know if you guys are looking at it at all, but it's something that maybe during wine tonight we can talk about.
Right.
How does the math work out if we all live 10 years longer?
Can I just make one comment?
Please.
In the military, we actually have a pretty good healthcare system, but it is completely unaffordable. I actually have a budget background as well. And in 2001, we had $19 billion in the health account in the Pentagon. In 2011, it was $51 billion. In 2015, it'll be about $65 billion. It's complete. We're going to have a very healthy, very small force when this is all over. And this is active and retired. I mean, it's the full package, but it's just not sustainable, as I believe it isn't for the country, unless we take the cost out and really understand what we're getting. And then the other point that I'm actually, when I speak and get asked about healthcare, I segue into the idea of wellness as opposed to treating the sick and treating disease, which we have to do. But how do we, at a time when all the indicators are going in the wrong direction, whether it's obesity or blood pressure or they're going, we need to figure out before we're born how we're going to raise healthy human beings that are well so that we don't have to spend the money at an exorbitant rate, particularly at the end of life, that we are spending now, and certainly all indications in the future will do the same thing. But having a discussion with doctors about wellness doesn't last very long. That's not where they're making their money. And it's my belief that discussion has to shift at some point in time. We can't afford what we're doing.
If I can, this is a great conversation, because I agree 100%, 1,000%, 101%. We have to actually look at the equation here and what the contributors and the takers away are. So doctors, hospitals, that kind of structure, but individuals as well. So if you run a company today, if you're leading a company today, one of the biggest challenges is to figure out how you fund the health infrastructure for your company. Well, you have it with the university. So you look at it and it's going up 15% every year. Even a really good company, unless you're a startup, doesn't have revenue growing at 10 or 15% a year. So something is going to be unbalanced here really soon. So you say, okay, what we're going to do is share some of this cost with employees, the users of the healthcare. First of all, that's a conversation no one wants to have. The employee doesn't have. Then you say, okay, so we'll temper that back. We'll share less than we thought, and we'll put incentives in place. And the incentives are around wellness. You say, okay, sounds like a good idea. So we did this. Most companies did this. And we said, so one of the biggest contributors to high health costs is smoking. It's such the line is so direct, it's amazing, right? By the way, there's other contributors, but this is one that you weren't born with. There's so if you smoke, it may not be hitting you today, but it's going to hit you soon. And if it's hitting you, it's going to hit the company's cost. So we said, well, if you smoke, we're going to differentiate the cost of or the contribution to healthcare for a smoker versus a non-smoker. It was like we were taking away gold. It is amazing how such a logical discussion. And by the way, we will help you by funding cessation, by whatever it is that you need to stop smoking. It is, and this is the response. The only reason why I'm bringing it up is that we have to take ownership of ourselves. Companies and governments and doctors, but it's us as well.
That's right.
This is not a right. Being unhealthy is not a right, okay? And so if we have bad habits, by the way, I have a lot of bad habits, we should at least pay attention to them and maybe stop one. Can we stop one? And then when you get good, then you start another one, stop another one, et cetera, et cetera. If we are healthier, to Admiral Mullen's point, guess what? It'll just cost less. Right. This whole thing will cost less. And we have to take responsibility ourselves, not in this, just ourselves, but. Yeah.
I'm going to tie these two questions together. You ask yours, you ask yours. Please.
Hello, and thank you very much. My name is Jacob Good. I am part of the 2013 graduating class from RPI.
Congratulations.
And for Ursula Browns, I must say that it has been nothing short of refreshing and inspiring hearing of the tenacity with which you pursue developing a sense of honesty and a let's get down to business attitude in business. And my question for you is, what would you say is the biggest hindrance to developing a work environment, be it in business or academia, that values honesty, trust, and respect for each other alongside this professional integrity and directness and openness and honesty?
I think it's history.
Ursula, let her ask her question too.
My name is Lucy Larner, and I have been a resident for Troy for more than 20 years and had the pleasure of hearing Representative Lewis speak in Atlanta 10 years ago. I would like to just make a comment about corporate social responsibility. I raised corporate funds for the New York State Museum for more than 5 years. During the course of that period, I was able to secure funding and in-kind donations, principally funding from about 75 businesses, some international, some local, et cetera. Of those 75 corporate sponsors, 2 wished to be anonymous, one of which was Apple, the other which was local. In my experience, corporate social responsibility was the purview of the marketing and the public relations departments. Everything was brand-driven. Other decisions were made by how much visibility and benefits they would get. So I am very much a proponent of corporate social responsibility, but I'd like to ask the two women at the table who come from the corporate world, how do you reconcile my experience with what corporate social responsibility is really supposed to be?
And those will be the final questions. Ursula and Patty.
So Patty, you can tee up the second one. I can build on the second one. Please, everybody build on first. I think that the barriers to this real world conversations in business is what I call it, real world communications, real world approach to things, is not as big as you would think. I think it's happening more and more, primarily because of technology, because people are, whether or not I believe it, the employees of Xerox Corporation, my team members are talking every day, all the time, inside and outside the company. So having messages that are easy to grasp and clear to interpret, I found out is better than having this kind of really complicated corporate speak where nobody could figure out what I was saying. So the best way to do it is for me to say it so that people can actually just listen to it versus having a lot of these interpretation methods. I think the second barrier that's big is history. You know, there is a view of what a leader looks like. And it was a view that fewer and fewer people can fit in. They came from a certain place, certain type of education, a certain background, a certain studying pattern, and I think that the good news that's happening is that it's harder and harder for people to fit into that. More women are entering, more underrepresented minorities, significantly more international players. So we're going to have to figure out a new way to talk, a better way to talk. And the best way that people talk is what feels comfortable with them, that they can actually identify with. So I think you're going to see an avalanche of conversations that are significantly less corporate speak and more basic language, just because that's the best that we can do at the end of the day. And then the youth is the other one. I mean, so everybody who's living today is going to actually get to the point where they'll be you. You'll be sitting here and say, yeah, sounds like a better way to do it than the old guys did it. So I think it's coming. I don't think that there's this massive gap today. We're just purging through some history that will be replaced with some newness. On corporate social responsibility, by the way, we don't do it that way. So we don't. I mean, obviously, every company has a desire to have their brand and their belief structure fortified by everything that they do. So obviously, Xerox is focused on science because we need scientists, and I happen to be interested in science. So there's some of that in everything, but I don't know the experience that the lady was speaking has. We also give to the arts. And you would not consider us an arts company by any stretch of the imagination. We give to, we give to early childhood education. So I don't know. Annie?
Well, I actually believe there's nothing wrong with a corporation believing that their being successful is bound up in that institution's success. I think as long as you say that the corporation, whether they're investing in science or they're investing in the arts because they're a community citizen and want to be seen as that, as long as social responsibility is writ large, in that it is a recognition that their corporate success is bound up in our success, this community's success, this grandeur, then give them credit. There's nothing wrong with getting credit. It is a way for us as consumers to make decisions, way for us as employees to make decisions, way for us as vendors to make decisions about who do we want to be in business with. And I do think, if there are corporations who are making them on crass, if I give this money, it's going to get me that vote or that open door, they're probably not going to be that successful in the long run anyway. It should be much more of a closed cycle of reinforcing, self-reinforcing aspects. And so, there are good companies and there are great companies. It sounds like, unfortunately, she was dealing with a lot of just good companies, and the great companies are going to certainly give in ways that reinforce who they are and what they believe in their own sense of success, but with the greater context of our shared success.
Good. Well said. Well, at tomorrow's commencement ceremonies, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute will confer honorary degrees on Congressman John Lewis, civil rights icon and senior member of the United States Congress, on Admiral Mike Mullen, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, on Ursula Burns, the chairman and CEO of the Xerox Corporation, and Patty Stone Cipher, technology and philanthropy pioneer and director of Martha's Table. Each of them represents and reflects what we hope for in our graduates, and collectively, they answer the question that's embedded in the Rensselaer motto, which is our challenge to our students. Why not change the world? Let us thank them. We're going to take a quick picture over here. Patty, we're going to take a quick picture over here. We're going to take a quick picture.
Thanks.
You can leave
That's
these.
terrific.
We're going to take a quick picture. Here, phenomenal. Here, phenomenal.
Yeah. We had a lot of fun with that.